Hi everyone, welcome to Piedmont Trails. My name is Carol. Today I'm going to be discussing the problems and struggles with census records. And I'm going to try to keep this video in about a 15-minute, 20-minute time period. So if you see me looking down, I'm trying to look down at my little clock here so that we can stay within our time limit, or try to. I do this with majority of our videos so far. That was our goals, because I know how important your time is. And so let's get started with today's video. The number one thing that I want to share with you guys is the original document of census records versus the copies, and how this method came into being. So critical. Even beginning from 1790, from the very first census record, these documents were copied, and that was in accordance to the federal government's guidelines that they were copied. But how were they copied? How were the census records taken? This all comes into play into our genealogy research. So the first thing that occurred was that an employee was hired to actually take the census record. They were instructed with guidelines and rules to abide by in order to take in the information. Once the census records, and this person is called an enumerator. Let me get that in case you don't know. The enumerator would arrive at a specific county of a specific state and begin taking the information. And once the census was completed by the enumerator would officially turn it over to the county court systems. County court systems. Then the county officials would take the document and they would proofread it, and they would make corrections if needed. They would had the right to omit people. They had the right to add people. They had the ability to change names, correct spellings, and so on. And they would add notes on to these actual census records. Once it was proofreaded, and they were fine with what they had, the changes that they had made, and they all felt secure about them, then it was copied, leaving the original at the county level, and the copied version was sent to the federal level. So the original never left the county level. Is everybody with me now? Okay. That's how it came into be. If you're researching online, majority of the census records that you are viewing are federal copies. And I just want to make sure that some of the 1790 census has been the most copied census out of all of the census records, for several reasons. One is because of the actual size of the record. As you know, census records grew from decade to decade, with adding more and more information. So due to and the other reason is because of it was the first official census record taken on a federal level. So you can find the 1790 census in all kinds of formats, and microfilms, and all kinds of formats. But please understand that the federal version of these census records are copies. Okay. The enumerator was not required to obtain any proof of information given at any time. That was never set as a guideline or a rule for the enumerator to obtain proof of any of the information that was given. However, there was in the guidelines a $20 penalty back in 1790 if a person was caught giving false information. But in all of the years of my research, I have never ran across any one individual who was charged with this $20 penalty. And so for all of you viewers, if you have ran across this, I would love to have that information. I would love to see that. So share with me if you have ran across that. The head of household listed was not necessarily the oldest person living in the home. I'll say that again. The head of household was not necessarily the oldest person living in the home. And if you happen to view online and you see an alphabetical order of a census record, make no mistake about it, it is not the original copy of a census record. It's not even an original copy. If it's an alphabetical order, not quite sure what it is. You might want to check your sources. It could be that years being prior to, someone decided to go through the whole census record of that particular area and alphabetize it. And that's great if they did. But you need to determine the source. Forms did not appear formally until around 1800 and 1810. It was different with different areas, depending on where they were. An 1820 census was not 10 years. It was not 10 years apart from the 1810 census. The 1820 census was actually 9 years, 9 months, and 25 days. This affected a great amount of the population, possibly placing them in a different column. Very important. The 1820 census also narrowed the age with a separate column for 16 to 18 white males. It also began determining the slaves' ages, number of foreigners that were not naturalized, and agricultural data, craftsman data, and much more. It's on page 2. Most of your online versions of your 1820 census will not have page 2. So make sure that you're seeing the entire census when you're viewing or researching. 1830 narrows the gauge for ages even more, and it also adds even more columns to the census, which it adds the deaf and dumb column and the blind column as well. The 1840 census goes into detail about the pensioners, and this is one of my favorite census years. Personally, I love the census records from 1790 to 1840. And I can tell you every little nook and cranny where you can find information that pertains to your genealogy research. I love those particular years, and I have, yes, they're fascinating. Don't get me wrong, 1880 and 1900 census are treasure troves, but yes, you get a lot of information through the early census records. But getting back to the pensioners, each pension person or individual who was receiving a pension during 1840 was listed on page 2 of the 1840 census with their first and last name, male or female, and even minor children are listed. Regardless, if someone in that household was receiving a pension in 1840, their first and last name was listed on page 2 of the 1840 census. Make sure that you are viewing the original document and both pages of the census. And I say this because there are notes on the original versions of the census records. There are notes there that could pertain to your family. There's could be a lot of explanations explained. They could had been originally counted but were omitted for various reasons. They may have moved during the time between the proofreading time of the census and the census being proofreaded by the county officials. So the originals give you much, much more data and information versus copies. It was not until 1850 when states were also required to have a copy of the census. So now you have 2 official copies now by 1850. You have your enumerator going out to all of the households, getting the numbers, getting the information. They are coming back to the county courthouse. They are officially turning in the census. Now the county officials on the county level are proofreading this census document, making notes, omitting people, adding people, etc. And then, once they're completed that, now there's a copy made. One copy is made for the federal level, and one copy is made for the state level. And the original stays at the original location in the county. So with each year, each decade that goes by, not each year, but each decade that goes by, the census records are growing, and they're adding more and more and more information to these forms. So that by 1890, the census form is huge. It's asking a ton of information, and you can go by this from the 1880 census. So the guidelines were changed again on the 1890 census, and it was not required for the county officials to make copies of the 1890 census. They were allowed to make corrections. They were allowed to proofread it, go over it, but they were not allowed to make any copies. The original was sent to the federal level, and there were no other copies. So when the damage occurred with the 1890 census and the fire, and the documents were destroyed, there were no other copies, and that is why the United States changed the guidelines for that particular decade. By 1900, they changed it back. So 1900 has plenty of copies for that. So getting into the problems with census records, one of your number one problems is misspellings. If you happen to have the chance to view the original records, the original document, I have actually seen one of my ancestors' names wrote over, like they were trying to change or correct the spelling of one of my ancestors' last names. So misspellings were frequent, and they happened often, and they resulted in mistakes. And then once you were creating a copy on a federal level or a state level, the more copies that you made, you will see more and more mistakes. Another problem and struggle area is wrong and incorrect data, information. And this can also occur during the transcription, while the original document is being transcribed, but it can also occur between the head of household or the family members and communication lines with the enumerator. Maybe the enumerator heard something else and made a mistake in taking it. The third thing that most important that I feel that contribute to problems with census records are misunderstandings and language barriers. And this occurred often. It could be that the enumerator did not explain themselves very well on why they were there, what information they were seeking, and why, which created a misunderstanding between the family members and the enumerator in acquiring the correct information. Also, language was a great hindrance back in especially during the early 19th century, late 18th century. You had a lot of foreign immigrants arriving who were not very fluent with the English language and may not have understood and did not quite know what information that the enumerator was trying to receive. Another thing to think about is an anxiety that would have occurred with the fear of the government. If a family lived in a very rural area and did not have much communication ties with national events and what was going on with the nation as a whole, maybe they were more concerned about what the news within their community boundaries and did not associate on a national level very much, was not active with political events or voting, things of that nature. So they may have an automatic anxiety, fearing and fear of the government, with a government employee arriving on their property and asking them all of these questions. And they would automatically think, oh, why are they here, and why are they needing this information? So it could be a fear of the government. And the other thing is, families moved, and maybe they were elsewhere. And this recently came up with a person that I was working with their family tree, and I had to show them documents from my personal family tree that families traveled. It seems to be, for some reason, an understanding that during the colonial period between the 18th century and the onset of the Civil War, that for some reason families never traveled. But that isn't true. Families traveled all the time, for business, for visiting other family members, for events. And I have a prime example of one of my ancestors who left North Carolina during the early 19th century and traveled westward to Indiana, but still traveled back and forth through North Carolina and Indiana for the remainder of his life, and made many, many trips, sometimes alone, sometimes with his family. He even still owned property in North Carolina until around 1820. So to think that families didn't travel during the colonial period or the early 19th century is very wrong. And families traveled often. And it's another way of putting this is, some people will regard our ancestors' lives as living during a simpler time. It's not that they lived through a simpler time, it's just it was a different life. They lived just as we do today, but a lot of the methods and things that they did on a daily basis were just simply different compared to the way we live today. So it's not that it's a simpler life, it's not that they didn't travel, it's just a different life and a different way of traveling. So I hope that all of this information can help you guys in understanding when you're researching online and you're viewing a census record and you're questioning things. Well, this doesn't look right, this isn't spelled right. They have an additional person in the home. Who is this? And they're at this age. Think about the problems that may have occurred between the translation portion of the original to the copy version, and seek out the original documents. I can't say that enough. On a personal level, I use the online version of the federal census as clues and hints. I don't reference them as actual proof of my ancestors' existence. I try to go on the ground level and seek out the original records. Thank you all so much for joining me, and if you have questions or comments about today's video, don't hesitate, let me know. I'm always here for you guys, always. And remember, our ancestors left an amazing trail to follow. Enjoy your journey today to the past, and God bless.